Welcome back to the Contrarians. This is yet another Patreon suggested topic, the thought exercises that I think that Contrarians are becoming known for. Tonight, we're doing our top 5 non-rock albums. So what is the definition of a non-rock album? We didn't decide. Every panelist gets to decide their own definition of non-rock. So I hope that we see a lot of different genres represented, maybe even a little controversy, because I hate to be the one who's always starting the controversies. So if you don't think that something is non-rock enough, feel free to leave a comment. Also, like, subscribe, all the things to help out the channel. The Contrarians love you for it. Tonight, we are going to open up with Mr. Peter Jones. Peter, tell us about your top 5 non-rock albums, sir.
Very good. Thank you, Reed. Glad to see you and glad to see everybody, and welcome new members. Always great to see those as well. Interesting topic. Anybody who's watched that I've participated in knows that I've got an enormous range of music that I like. So this wasn't too difficult, except from the standpoint of trying to narrow down which of the many things that I listen to non-rock related that I want to present today. So I just kind of picked some seminal albums that had a huge impact over my life and still have some real strong meaning for me. And the first one goes from 1964. And it was from my childhood. And this is from the Disney collections. And this is the Just So Stories, adapted from Rudyard Kipling's book, narrated by the infamous Sterling Holloway, of course, the voice of Winnie the Pooh and Kaa from the Jungle Book. This is one of the real first introductions to me of the beauty in the combination of words and music. The music's very mysterious, and it painted pictures and visuals for me as a child listening to it. Plus, I really grew a strong affinity to Kipling's writings, picked up his books, and I read to my children and read the Just So Stories, of which there are many more than just the 2 that are on here. I finally found a real clean replacement version on LP. It's the only way you can get it. My other one was so completely beat up and destroyed that it skipped 6,000 times on each side. So I finally found one, and that was a huge joy. So it's nice to have that archived for grandkids in the future and that kind of thing. My second one is one of my other real loves. I am an absolute addict of a really good musical. These are also, as a musician, these are things that I've performed as a percussionist and as a drummer. So I have both a love of it as a visual art and entertainment, but as an entertainer and a musician. And I have to pick West Side Story soundtrack, because this, to me, is just one of the greatest movie soundtracks there is out there. The compositions on this are stunning standalone pieces of art. The songs are so famous: America, Cool, Tonight, Maria. You just go on and on. There's so much great stuff. I have, like I said, so many great memories of playing in the orchestra for a long run of the show. And so it's one of those ones I can just put on, let it run right straight through, and the memories just come flooding back. The next one, we're going out and jump into 1959, which is one of my most favorite years ever, with Dave Brubeck and the Time Out album. And this is seminal in a lot of different ways. My dad passed away last month, and one of the things that I always had from him is I have his original heavy, thick Brubeck records. And so this is one I gravitated to very early. And of course, as a young drummer, most of these odd time signatures, which is why they call it time out, because there's really very few sections that are in any standard time. And of course, the massive hit Take 5 is on there, which is probably one of the most famous jazz tracks of all time. Went right over my head. But it was a beautiful lesson and a beautiful discovery as I figured out how to play them and learn to appreciate them on a completely different level. This is another one that I put on uninterrupted. I shut off distractions. I sit, get in my best listening position, and just go from start to finish. Also falling in love as a drummer with Joe Murillo, and his playing, and then learning later on with the rock drummers that I love, Ian Pace and a lot of the others who took a lot from Joe Murillo, John Bonham, and players like that. The last two go to another side of me, and this kind of embraces my mother, who I lost in 2009. My degrees in music are in classical percussion, and she and I would sit together as I would take a very long and arduous process to discover which actual classical version I would like, because unlike pop, if you want Beethoven's Fifth, there's probably 500 recordings in the world, and you got to figure out which one you want. But this is one of two pieces that I want to point out, and this ties into the rock world because we were just talking about this the other day on another show, and this is The Planets, the Suite by Gustav Holst. And this was written in 1914 through 1917. And of course, Mars, the Bringer of War, has been adapted so many times. It was the inspiration for the opening riff to Black Sabbath. Cozy Powell would do his drum solo to it. ELP with a Powell would redo the song. It's been adapted so many times in films and everything. This version, from Charles Dutoit with the Montreal Symphony, is simply one of the most enjoyable pieces of music I own, regardless of genre. It's just amazing. And the last one is a real interesting one for me. Hector Berlioz, this is the Requiem, and this is the heavy metal of the day. This was written in 1837, and my exposure to this happened when I was a small kid. We used to camp in northern Michigan at the International Music Camp, Interlaken. And so we would go up there to camp, and we would go hear all the orchestras play with my dad was a member when he was in high school, and I was fortunate enough to be accepted when I was in high school and play up there as a percussionist. But it would always rain. Every time we went up there to camp, it always rained. So we are in what they call Kresge Bowl, which had open ends on the sides, a lake behind it. And the piece, the Requiem, requires one of the largest orchestras that you will ever see. The whole front line of the stage is lined with timpani. There's two separate choirs antiphonally on the sides of the stage and a second full brass ensemble. It's massive. Well, when this thing goes in full force, it's like an earthquake. And when I was little, it was storming. I heard the thunder. I saw the lightning. I'm hearing this orchestra that was just shaking me. And I had dreams for years that devils were dancing across the front of the stage to fire. And it was years later, I was visiting my mom. I walked through her listening area, and the section came on, and I stopped dead in my tracks. And I said, "What is that?" She goes, "Oh, it's the Requiem." I go, "Is this from Interlaken?" She goes, how did you remember that?" I was single digits. And that was the piece. And when I put it back on, all the goosebumps came back, and it's just a massive, massive, powerful composition, and very, very musically enjoyable. So those are my five, from Disney all the way through Hector Berlioz. So those are my choices.
Very good, Peter. Hey, speaking of storms, there's a pretty nasty one raging outside. If this suddenly stops, I apologize. My electricity sometimes is not super stable. And we're going to go next down under Bicycle Legs. Let's have your top 5 non-rock albums.
Thanks, Reed. Wonderful to be on the panel here. Absolutely wonderful to meet Steve and Jack for the first time too. Thanks, guys. Love to see new people on here. Peter, thank you so much for picking both the Brubeck album and The Planets, because they were two that I left out, and I was really, really sad for having to leave out. But the way I've gone with this topic is that I've tried to pick 5 different albums for 5 different non-rock genres. So what I've done is the first one I'm going to go with is going to be my sort of orchestral classical, if you want to call it that. And that is Pictures and Exhibition by Mussorgsky. Now, I obviously got into this originally because of the Emerson, Lake and Palmer album, but I then went and sought out a copy. And this one here actually has both versions. It has the original solo piano version, and then it has the orchestral version that was orchestrated by Maurice Ravel. And both versions are wonderful in their own ways. Just an incredible piece of music by Mussorgsky. My favorite piece by him, although A Night on Bald Mountain, is also absolutely wonderful. Just a later sort of ending period of the Romantic, going into the early 20th century, sort of really my jam. Musically, I got a lot from my parents, and my father was massive into jazz and my mother was massive into classical music. But I tend to like the sort of jazz and the sort of classical that my parents didn't. Whereas my mother was very much into sort of the strictly classical, sort of your Mozarts and your Haydns and that sort of thing. I tended to go more for the late 19th century, early 20th century sort of classical music. Similarly with jazz, my father was big into big band and Dixieland jazz. And while I love some really early Dixieland, I tend to like sort of bop and later as my sort of jazz of choice. So the jazz album that I've decided to go for to represent that side of my music listening is A Love Supreme by John Coltrane. This is an incredible piece of music. Very much a studio piece. I think he only ever played it live once. And you've got John Coltrane, you've got McCoy Tyner, Jimmy Garrison and Elvin Jones. It's just a wonderful quartet. It's a great example of what got known as Coltrane's sheets of sound. Just incredible. Like he would just play and like where his inventiveness was coming from, where these improvisations were coming from, I have no idea, but they are absolutely brilliant. The compositions themselves are really, really good too, but the compositions are really just the launching point for Coltrane in particular to just blow. And like nobody played saxophone the way Coltrane did. Like he was just an incredible talent and gone way too soon. Died at the age of, I think, 40. Just, I wonder sometimes what could have been if he'd been around a little bit longer. The next genre I'm going to go for is electronic music. This is something that I got into in my teenage years. I could have picked just about any album by this artist, but I'm going to go with probably one of his best known albums, and that is Oxygene by Jean-Michel Jarre. It's a French electronic composer. Oxygene Part 2 got used in the movie Gallipoli, which is one of my favorite films, one of my favorite Australian films in particular. But this is, again, it's a wonderful, it's all instrumental, it's all made with electronic synthesizers and other electronic keyboards, and a very primitive drum machine in some of the parts, but this is definitely electronic composition. I could have picked all sorts of things for this, but Jean-Michel Jarre is really where it started for me getting into electronic music, so that's why I decided to go with him. It's absolutely wonderful album, but you really can't go wrong with any of his first sort of 6-7 albums. I think they're all absolutely brilliant. The fourth one I'm going to go for is probably in the genre of ambient music. And again, a lot I could have chose from here. And I'll probably get to one of those if we do get around to honorable mentions. but I'm going to go with Let the Power Fall by Robert Fripp. And this album is entirely of his music that was known as Frippatronics. So what it was is he'd have two tape machines set up, and he would make these loops, and he would just sort of play single notes or couple of notes and make a loop, and then play another one and, you know, loop it and loop it and loop it like 20, 30 times, and just make this absolutely gorgeous sort of sheen of guitar notes. And then he would play a solo over the top of them. If I need to really unwind, relax, this is the sort of thing I will go for. It just, you can close your eyes, take it in, and just sort of drift away. It's absolutely gorgeous music for that. And can't highly recommend this enough. Now, my last album is going to be folk music, and this one is very much a parochial choice. It's not one that my friends overseas are likely to have ever seen or ever be able to get. And this is by a band from the 60s called the Wayfarers. This album is called The Barley Mow. And this is traditional Australian and Irish folk music. And this is a particularly parochial choice for me, because if you notice this rather handsome young gentleman here on the double bass, that was my father. So, but this is just really wonderful. If you're into those sort of traditional old Irish and Australian folk songs that tell stories, this is absolutely gorgeous. Just great storytelling in all of these songs, you know. Just, yeah, I don't know how else to really describe it. It's just, you know, sort of bass, double bass, acoustic guitars, occasionally some banjo. Yeah, probably not songs that Americans would be familiar with at all. But here, there are some very famous songs like the Rybuck Shearer and Another Fall of Rain and the Barley Mow. Just wonderful, as I say, traditional folk music. But yeah, those are my 5 choices. I'm really, really excited to see what everybody else goes for too. But yeah, I wanted to try and represent as many different sort of non-rock genres as I could. If we do have time at the end, I do have a few honorable mentions too. So yeah. Great. Thanks, guys.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Love the special appearance by your dad there. Always happy to see family members make an appearance. All right, let's go. I've already forgot who I said was going next, but we're going Kevin. Kevin, what are your top 5 non-rock albums?
Well, it's great to be here this evening. I love these big panels, these thought exercises, because it's really interesting to see how everyone structures it. And I think I'm going to have a different take on it even than our first 2, but great picks so far. I try to listen to a variety of music too. It is pretty rock and heavy metal centric, but I always need a palate cleanser here and there. And so I just grabbed whatever I had on my shelf at the moment. Probably has been sitting there for the last couple months that I use to break up the hard rock and the heavy metal from time to time. So my first pick is something my father would listen to a lot in the car. And as a kid, I got annoyed with it. But like most of us, as we get older, we grow to appreciate it. And this artist in particular. So my first pick is Johnny Cash, Live at Folsom Prison. For people that don't even like country music, they tend to like this album and Johnny Cash in general. This is the quintessential Johnny Cash album, in my opinion. It's got everything, you know, and really cements him as, you know, the man in black and kind of the start of this outlaw country movement. I just think it's a great album, and kind of a crossover album too, quite frankly. Next one is from a genre I really didn't pay attention to until maybe the last 5 years, and now I am really heavily into it. And particularly this artist, and that's Al Green, Call Me. I just love this album, and every time I put it on for someone who's never heard it, they instantly love it. I mean, I love the instrumentation on this album. It's very delicate, kind of like Al's voice, but then at times he just soars above all the instruments. It's almost like the instruments are being played with paintbrushes. It's just, it's kind of there, but it's not. It's the perfect mix for Al's voice, and I love it. It always puts me in a good mood. That's why I love putting that one on. Next one from a female artist who everyone knows, Aretha Franklin. I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You. This is the album that everyone thinks of when they think of Aretha Franklin. I mean, it starts off with Respect, which is an Otis Redding song that she completely makes her own and takes on a whole new meaning. But you've got Dr. Feelgood, Do Right Woman, Do Right Man. It's just a wide range of emotion on this album, but her voice, just the effortless power of it is, again, something I go back to every now and then and just sit back in awe, quite frankly. The next one is a more recent album, but it's one I keep going back to because I'm still, I think, learning a bit about this album and this artist. And I kind of like the mood it puts me in and the setting. And that's Lana Del Rey, Norman effing Rockwell. Came out in 2019. It's very, it's like poetry set to this very ambient piano ballad kind of atmosphere. And I read one reviewer, I forget his name, he said it's like yoga music for the apocalypse. I think that's a great description of it. I think Lana is one of our greatest modern lyricists and songwriters, and just a real great command of language. I mean, you could take the lyrics and they could just be poems all by themselves. So that's that one. And my last pick is an artist I have just huge admiration for and respect, just given his story. And this is a live album, and it's one of those live albums where it kind of captures him and his band at the height of their powers. And that's Bill Withers, live in Carnegie Hall. Released right after his first two albums, Just As I Am and Still Bill. I mean, starts off with Use Me. You got Ain't No Sunshine, Grandma's Hands, Lean on Me. I mean, these are all songs he wrote late. I mean, he was in the Navy for 9 years out of school. Kind of just picked up the guitar on the side and started writing songs. Clarence Avant finds him in a club. They record some demos. Stephen Stills is on the first album. You know, Booker T. Jones produces it. I mean, it's just a weird confluence of events and just completely iconic songs that just came out of this man as he was pushing 30. And yeah, I mean, everyone loves those. It's another one of those artists where you say Bill Withers and some people know who it is and some don't, but as soon as you play the songs, it's like, oh yeah, what a talent. So yeah, these are all things that have been on my shelf the last couple months, and they're kind of palate cleansers for me. And I just constantly go back to them.
Fantastic, Kevin. Thank you very much. And I think that, the most interesting thing about doing these panels is seeing the different perspective from people, because you have to make your own definitions, right? All right, Steve, you're going to be up next, your inaugural Contrarians panel. Tell us what your 5 favorite non-rock albums are.
Sure. And thanks for having me. And I never trusted my dad's taste in music, but he did see Ella Fitzgerald 3 times. And this, I think, is the most perfect recorded album I've ever heard.
Nice.
And the version of Cheek to Cheek is flawless. I can't think of a better song ever recorded. It's just so good. That's a nice little thing, just like you're late at night, just put that on, soothing. A couple months ago, I was in a record store and somebody was playing this really funky jazz. I heard like a sax being played through a wah-wah pedal. This is Reuben Wilson, Got to Get Your Own in the High Cost of Living. Bernard, I don't know if you can see it. Bernard Purdy plays drums on it. It's like proto disco funk. It is, I don't even think you can find like a CD, or it's not even on iTunes. It's one of those kind of things. You got to find it on YouTube. Really, it's just so good. It's so funky, and he's a Hammond organ player. Such really good stuff. And then I was reading Richard Thompson autobiography, and he mentioned Lau and Mike Watterson, Bright Phoebus. Another one you can't find. I find this would have been perfect music for the Wicker Man. It's like, it sounds like ancient old English folk, even though it was made in the 70s. And it's kind of haunting and a little disturbing, but it's quirky. It's stunning. It's another one you can't find anywhere, but it's on YouTube. So, and then the other one is, I love Jimmy Smith, another Hammond organ player, Peter and the Wolf. The man shreds like Eddie Van Halen on keyboards. There's this bit in here where it's just like, are you kidding me? A good buddy of mine turned me on to this. It's like, I mean, the cover is ridiculous. Let's be honest. That's a ridiculous cover. You can't really see it, but he's dressed like a wolf. And then there's a guy in red leotards, but the music's impeccable. It's so good. And then my last one is, I'm kind of cheating. It's a box set. Hank Williams, the singles collection. I love this singles collection because a lot of this stuff after he died, they put on all these strings. This is just, a lot of it's just raw demos, and it's so good. And it's, puts you in a dark place, a lot of it, but it's great music. And I just love the sparseness of that collection that came out in the late 80s, early 90s. It's a 3-disc set. Highly recommend it.
Wonderful. Steve, do me a favor. The one you described as Old English folk that isn't, what was the title of that one? I didn't get it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bright Phoebus. Bright
Phoebus.
Yeah. And there's a compilation on like Spotify and iTunes. Billy Bragg does a cover of one of their tunes.
Okay.
And I guess they were an old English, they did traditional English folk. And they got in big trouble when they did this kind of like this album. And Richard Thompson's on it too. And Dave Maddox from Fairport. I should have mentioned that.
All right, very good. All right, 4 panelists, 4 extremely different selections. I would be shocked if we got any overlaps tonight. But let's see what Nick S. has to add. Nick, what are your 5 top non-rock albums?
There's an overlap right there, but we'll throw.
No.
We'll pretend we didn't see that because I have a lot of others. But Kevin's good taste. Besides rock, some of the genres I listen to, much to Reed's chagrin, I like country, especially classic country, old country. I listen to a lot of blues, although I only have one blues artist and album in my 5 here. I'll listen to offbeat stuff like polka and stuff like comedy and novelty stuff. I'm probably going to show you a couple things that are maybe against the rules, but it's mainly to highlight the artist rather than a particular album. But the first one is probably the album I have listened to the most in the last 30 years, including rock, including anything. I've listened to this thing the most. I bought it before the internet. There was an ad in the back of Goldmine magazine. You send away a money order or check, and then you got your double CD in the mail. I've studied this CD like the Zapruder film. I've studied it like the Dead Sea Scrolls. I've studied it like the Shroud of Turin. And some of you are going to know some of the material on here. It's technically a bootleg, but it's a bootleg that compiles all this cool stuff. I would describe it in the genre of novelty and comedy, and it's called Celebrities at Their Worst. That cool art cover there. This is a double CD. You can even find this for sale on Amazon, eBay, and they have a listing on Discogs. So it's legit, but not legit. I've gotten more hours of enjoyment out of this CD than I can tell you, and it picks up for me where Spinal Tap leaves off, where you learn every single subtle nuance of things that people are saying, whether it's blooper clips from stars or just people losing their mind. It's not very PC. It's not safe for work. As far as the non-rock stuff goes, and people may have heard some of these clips, like if they followed Howard Stern years ago, but you've got the Casey Kasem losing his mind, Orson Welles, you've got Jack Palance, those kinds of things. And it's just a joy to hear it. I listen to it over and over again. Some of the other non-rock people, Jerry Lewis, hysterical, Jonathan Winters, sports people like Tommy Lasorda. If you ever heard the famous Tommy Lasorda tapes where he loses his mind in the clubhouse with the press, or he was mic'd up on the mound. Earl Weaver. So there's a lot of sports stuff. But as far as the music stuff goes, Bing Crosby doing bloopers. One of my favorites is Julie London. Spoiler alert, you may see her in a bit. Julie London swearing like a longshoreman is just something you've got to hear once in your life. She's just wonderful. Elvis Presley, the famous Trog tapes are on here. If anyone heard of that, where I think that was some inspiration for Spinal Tap, where the Trogs are recorded surreptitiously in the studio talking about different things, and they sounded just like it was a scene out of Spinal Tap. Of course, Casey Kasem, and of course the Buddy Rich tapes are on here. I don't, Peter knows about the Buddy Rich tapes, but Buddy having full mental breakdown, yelling at his band. It's a cousin of the Buddy Rich tapes, but my favorite of all time is the Paul Anka recording. Same thing, yelling at his band, losing his mind, hidden recording, and it's just wonderful. I actually sympathize with Paul Anka. I feel like I'm living it with him. I feel his pain and his frustration, and I know he's been asked about it many times. But the Paul Anka recording, which I think you can also hear on YouTube, is just a joy to behold. So that's my number one. But there's other volumes, but that's number one. Celebrities at Their Worst. Number two, same vein. One of my favorite guys of all time, offbeat, Tiny Tim, the Eternal Troubadour. This is not his most famous, which is God Bless, which had the original Tiptoe Through the Tulips. But this one this is like sort of an album in the 80s where Tiny can still sing in the high falsetto register, but he also sings low. I discovered this album in the bargain bins, then played it a lot on college radio. And you can do yourself a favor, and it turns your day around just listening to Tiny Tim singing Tiny Bubbles. Plus, he does a re-record of Tiptoe Through the Tulips and a lot of the other standards. But that's just a great one. So Tiny Tim, as probably people know, he was come across as maybe a buffoon, but he really knew his stuff about music, and he was quite a expert on the American songbook. The only blues artist I have in here is a guy who's sort of genre defining, genre bending. If you take maybe some blues, some of the field blues music of Alan Lomax, a healthy dose of Sam Cooke, and some country, you'll get a guy by the name of Ted Hawkins. I discovered him in '94. He had an album called The Next 100 Years. I have that somewhere. This is a collection on Rhino, which is just wonderful. It's a collection of his music from the early '70s through his passing in '94. He released an album called The Next 100 Years. That's how I discovered him, and then he was dead within a few months. Died in his late 50s. He got some acclaim in the UK in the 80s and was sort of well known there. And Billy Bragg famously covered one of his songs, so he was sort of well known there. But he was famous. He was a famous guy because he played a lot on the streets of Venice Beach in California. His acoustic guitar, and he played on the milk crate with the piece of wood to tap on, and then he also fretted his acoustic guitar with a glove, a big heavy leather glove, and instead of a pick, he used Lee press-on nails. He was a quirky guy, had a really difficult life, in and out of jail, the whole thing. But if you can imagine this amalgam of different genres, it's not just sort of like Sweet Home Chicago. It's really different stuff. And the preferred thing he does is just really play by himself. He does have tracks where he plays with a band. there's a VHS tape years ago, VHS, that's how long ago, called Amazing Grace. And it was a profile about his life. I believe it came out right after he died, but here's some of the artists that's across all sorts of genres: Harry Belafonte, Billy Bragg, John Doe, Michael Penn, Pete Seeger, Mavis Staples, Charlie Musselwhite. Those people talking about Ted Hawkins. So do yourself a favor. He's just fantastic. I think that's number 3. You know, I could have shown you 4 or 5 albums. We'll go Willie Nelson, Stardust. Any Willie is good Willie, especially anything from the mid 70s to maybe the early 90s. He's just a wonderful songwriter. I don't need to say much about him, but Stardust is great because there's some of the hits besides Stardust: George on My Mind, Blue Skies, All of Me, and something else on here. Someone to watch over me, but it's as good as album as you're going to get from Willie. Number 5, let's rip through this. Yeah, I'll not to be redundant. I'll go with Julie London. Julie London is has a wonderful, unique voice. I love her. I've discovered her years ago. She was sort of like a COVID find. So a lot of her stuff on streaming. It's really Any Julie is good Julie. The one album I wanted to show you actually was her last album in the late 60s called Yummy, 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 where she does a lot all pop covers. And you haven't heard anything until you heard her do Yummy, Yummy, Yummy in that sultry voice that she does. But Any Julie's good Julie. And I know she's gotten some acclaim since she's passed. Her recordings are in movies and stuff. And I don't think she got the accolades that she deserved. And I listened to a Julie London album and I haven't heard a bum one in the bunch. And she released at least 15 or so on Liberty Records throughout the late 50s and 60s. Of course, her biggest hit is Cry Me a River. I prefer some of her later stuff with the more lush orchestration, but Any Julie's good Julie. Thanks.
Okay, Nick, very interesting. As we're recording this, it's just a couple of days past Willie Nelson's 90th birthday. So happy birthday, Willie. All right, let's move on to Jack Holloway. Jack, I think this is, well, it's your first panel I've been on with you. I know you did the trivia with us, so welcome. And I'm looking forward to hearing your top 5 non-rock albums.
Yeah, thanks. It's so cool. I do have there is one that it was overlap, but I moved it to honorable mentions. I won't reveal what that is yet, but the first choice is Helu Murgia, Weda Haraguzo. I don't know if you're familiar with Awesome Tapes from Africa, but it's a label that this guy, I mean, it's exactly what it sounds. He finds awesome tapes from Africa and he reissues them. And this is like Ethiopian jazz funk from the early 70s. And talk about an album where if you want to feel at peace, if you want to be like calm, this is my like bliss out album. I have listened to this probably more than anything else on my shelf. And actually, because there's been this resurgence and this appreciation of him, he came to Brooklyn. He's like 90 something at this point. And I got him to sign it. Little Helu there. Okay, my second is Nas, Illmatic, which is pretty typical of Brooklyn, where I live, especially Bushwick, Brooklyn. You'll hear this playing in cars a lot. To me, it's just it's a perfect 10. It's like every single song on it is amazing, and it was a kind of rap that, I mean, it's a first of its kind in the sense that he really took rap to a whole new level and of seriousness and of poetry and of like wordsmithery. Like, he's an incredible wordsmith, and then he just has this, like, his delivery is so it's not deadpan, but it's so matter of fact. It's not like dressed up or like jokey at all. It's like you're just getting his stream of consciousness, but his rhymes and his bars are still just like incredible. Okay, Hugh Masekela, Home is Where the Music Is. I have almost every Hugh Masekela studio album, and he was incredibly prolific. He came out with like 2 a year practically. So there's only like a couple I don't have. And this is the one I probably listen to the most. It's another, like, it's super chill. Um, and yeah, and then just like Home Is Where the Music Is. It's just like he's so positive. Like Hugh Masekela is such a positive force he was such a positive force in the world. And he's very underrated, like exceptionally underrated. In the movie Summer of Soul that Questlove made, which is an amazing movie, there's like a very brief part about Hugh Masekela, and he really just doesn't go into him enough. The other one is Monterey Pop, the Monterey Pop Festival. He performs what to me is like one of my top 10 favorite songs of all time, Baja Bula Banca, the healing song. And his performance in that, and when you see it on the music documentary that they made about Monterey, it's really quite fantastic. Going with pop, Madonna. This isn't like, fans of Madonna, this isn't even like their favorite Madonna album, but to me, like her this first album is just so incredible. Every song is like, it's such, I don't want to say basic, but it's like, it's the elementary elements of pop, the basic elements of pop, but absolutely used to their fullest potential. And like her performances and her voice, and you can hear the kind of like, on Burning Up, like you can hear the waitress singing that, you can hear like the desperation in her voice. And listening to this album from back to front, or from front to back, really made me a huge Madonna fan, which I'd never expected to be, like being obsessed with metal my whole life. And then what was going to be an honorable mention, but is now one of my 5 because of the overlap. This is a more recent one, Toe Tales by Jasmine Sullivan. She just won the Grammy for Best Artist, not this last year, but the previous one. And I was really hoping that she would, because they didn't have a vinyl, and I knew that if she won, then they would make a vinyl. I think it won, there were some other things it won. I think best record with Pick Up Your Feelings. It's a concept album, and it tells the story of like what it's like to live, to like exploit your body in order to get ahead in life. And so it's about like strippers and sex workers, and in between so it'll do this thing where it'll start out with a recording from someone who's like explaining their philosophy of life, and it's like a sex worker, and then this next song is like about the concept that she had just talked about. And the song is like an incredible execution of, it's like it captures it so emotively and powerfully, and every song is like a 10 out of 10. And then there's an incredible workers anthem, an incredible like underclass anthem called is The Other Side. Yeah, track 6, The Other Side. It's all about being poor and wishing that you were rich. Oh my God, I have cried actual tears listening to it. So yeah, those are my 5. I love lots of different kinds of music. So again, this was like very easy for me. What was difficult was like what not to choose, but these ones I think I get like in an exceptional amount of satisfaction listening to.
That is fantastic, Jack. Thank you. I don't know, pop? Is it rock? Maybe it depends on the pop itself. Philosophical question for the comments. All right. So this is going to be a little bit different from me because, as the Blues Brothers say, I listen to both kinds of music, hard rock and heavy metal. So that was in the Blues Brothers, right? I really never listen to non-rock music, except for a relatively brief period of my life In 2002, I moved from a field position into an office position, and I no longer felt comfortable listening to heavy music in that environment. My wife bought me a satellite radio, and I thought, what can I listen to that's not rock? Well, jazz was the first thing that came to mind. Somebody that was near me also had a satellite radio, and he listened to a lot of blues. So when I do listen to non-rock music, it is exclusively jazz or blues. But I can't stand 99% of the blues. I think it's the most boring music on the face of the earth. You either connect with it emotionally or you do not. And if you do not, there's just nothing there. I do not connect with it emotionally. I'm sorry, I'm a happy person. I'm not sorry about that. That said, I like energetic blues, and I will unapologetically hold up Stevie Ray Vaughan's Texas Flood as the best freaking blues album ever recorded. I have seen B.B. King live. I've seen Buddy Guy. I've seen Jimmy Vaughn. I've seen Josh Smith, all kinds of top blues guys. I would listen to this album 1,000 times before I listen to another B.B. King album. And I get to say that because this is my favorite album. That album is legendary. Obviously, Stevie died after only putting out 4 studio albums. The story of the album is legendary. He recorded it in 2 days with no overdubs. It single-handedly rebooted blues as a genre in the United States. It single-handedly sold millions of TS9 tube screamer pedals. And if you really want to get nerdy into guitar bullshit, go onto a forum and tell them that you're trying to find an original Ibanez tube screamer and see what kind of responses you get. It is just stupid how much people are into that. So, Texas Flood, fantastic album, 10 out of 10. The fact that he did that so rapidly with no overdub still just blows my mind. That album is amazing. Now, my second blues artist is one that you may not have heard of, but I love slide guitar. As you see, I've got guitars here. I can't play slide. I have no feel for it, but I admire a good slide player. My favorite is a man named Dave Hole. And this particular is a live album. The live one recorded in Perth, actually. Perth and Chicago. Dave had a hand injury, and he plays slide with his left hand hung over the neck of his guitar. Plays it like this. And it gives him a really strange phrasing, but he's incredibly energetic, like a buzzsaw. And if you like a lot of energy and a lot of rock in your blues and exclusively slide guitar, give Dave Hole a shot. Now, just to mention something Nick said ever so slightly earlier, Nick, there are no rules here, so I don't worry about breaking the rules. Because my next album is a boxed set. Let's talk about the definition of an album for a second. An album is a collection of things. One record is not an album. One record is a record. The thing that collects those records into one unit is an album. In this case, I love this boxed set. It's called Progressions, 100 Years of Jazz Guitar from Sony. Now, people that are really into their jazz don't do these types of collections because I don't know why. Not snobby enough for somebody. But I love them because this is 100 different guitar players stretched out over 100 years. So it's a tour of jazz guitar as long as there has been jazz guitar. So this allowed me in one album to get basically an overview of the entire genre and then hone in on the guys that I like. So it's 4 CDs. It was all of a sudden I'm blanking on the word, but John Schofield helped arrange the tracks on it. There are a couple of questionable ones, like they've got Jimi Hendrix on there, which, you know, Hendrix is Hendrix, but Hendrix is not jazz. So some things like that, but some fantastic guitar tracks on here, and it leads me to my next 2 selections. I like my jazz guitar centric. And when you talk about jazz guitar, at least in the modern world, I don't know anybody who had the impact of Wes Montgomery. Now, anybody who listens to jazz, you don't have to explain who Wes Montgomery is. If you do not listen to jazz, do yourself a favor and go listen to Wes Montgomery. He's known for playing with his fingers in an era where that was unknown for jazz players. They all played with picks. He's known for these wide octave shapes, but those things reduce what was an amazing talent. And I'm going to read this quote from the man himself. He says, "There is a jazz concept to what I'm about, but I'm playing popular music and it should be regarded as such." So this particular album, which I think I didn't give the name of, but it's called Wes Montgomery's Finest Album. It's a best of. Yes, that makes me a jazz poser, loving a best of album. But it's got his recordings of Tequila and his recording of a Beatles A Day in the Life. And listening to Wes Montgomery do the Beatles as an instrumental jazz song is really quite an experience. And what made him so astounding was that he was accessible. And by the late 60s, jazz was starting to really tighten up. Rock and roll had become the ascendant popular music form, and the jazz people were pulling back. And Wes was one of the very few who was pushing forward into the popular music sphere. He's well worth your time if you think you like jazz guitar. My last artist, I actually don't have because I've got it digitally, and I never think to print out covers like Peter does. So just to make sure that I'm pulling up the right title here, it's another famous jazz guitarist, Barney Kessel. And it's a collection called The Essential Albums, 1955 to 1963. So another cheat, I'm slipping in 6 albums. But it's just one album if you get it. So Barney Kessel was a household name in the 1950s. Unknown outside of jazz circles now, but Barney was unquestionably one of the best musicians to walk the planet in the 50s and 60s. He was a member of the Wrecking Crew, so he recorded numerous albums in Los Angeles. He played on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, if that sort of thing is important to you. But more than that, he was just an astounding jazz guitarist. He won polls as America's top jazz guitarist for about 13 years solid. In fact, to the point where he and a couple of other poll winners created a band called the Poll Winners. And if you think that sounds a little arrogant, Eric Clapton did the same thing with Cream. But he had the goods to back it up. He was the best. And if you like jazz guitar, you simply cannot go wrong with listening to Barney Kessel. One of the wonders of modern music is that you can buy a ton of this old music in a great format, cheap. That collection was $15. And man, if you like jazz guitar, that's the best $15 you will ever spend. All right, nice. So having pissed off the internet, that is my take. Let's go through and do honorable mentions. Everybody, let's try and do 2 or 3 minutes, no more. Peter?
Excellent. Great choices by everybody. The ones that are the top of my honorable mentions represent a genre that I've probably gone to the most for the combination of listening and educationally as a drummer. So these have high influences with me. I fell in love with Al Di Meola listening to Return to Forever, and when I got Land of the Midnight Sun, but Elegant Gypsy is where it went to another level with me. The combination of Al with that unbelievable tandem of Steve Gadd and Anthony Jackson on bass is just unstoppable. And this starts a run of records that I got as soon as they were available and have memorized every single possible note. And the last one comes from probably one of my biggest influences, Tony Williams, Lifetime. Of course, Tony, starting in his teen years with Miles Davis, this is when he just blossomed into something that has just truly become legendary in the drum world. The album, Alan Holdsworth, Alan Pasqua, Tony Newton, holy smokes, this is just a clinic of some of the greatest, most prolific jazz fusion you'll ever hear. And there's a reason why Tony is probably one of the most influential drummers of all time. So all of their catalogs, are things I listen to on a regular basis and refer back to them and enjoy them on a, like I said, on a regular basis. So Tony Williams and Al Di Meola. Those are my
Fantastic. A little jazz fusion. Weirdest cameo appearance by a jazz fusionist ever. Tony Williams on Public Image Limited's album. Figured that one out. It works. Bicycle Legs?
Yeah, that Al Di Meola album is actually one that's very new to me. I only picked it up in the last month or so. So
you're in for a treat.
I did a show on Peter Kerr's Rock Daydream Nation where we picked had to buy like a few albums with the $20 budget, and I managed to pick that up for like $4. So
you're gonna love it.
Yeah. Anyway, very quickly, for a classical one, we've got Stravinsky here with The Rite of Spring and The Firebird, two of the greatest ballet pieces ever written. Just to cover basically his whole catalog, I picked ESP by Miles Davis, first album by his second great quintet, absolutely wonderful. Again, any of his ambient stuff you could go for, but I've picked Ambient One Music for Airports by Brian Eno, just some of the best ambient music you'll ever hear in your life. And for something electronic, again, this is just a placeholder for pretty much this whole band's catalog. Phaedra by Tangerine Dream, just absolutely wonderful, trippy space music. Wonderful stuff.
Okay, let's keep it going. Kevin, you got any honorable mentions?
Yeah, I'll just rattle off a few titles. Madonna, Ray of Light. That's my favorite Madonna album. Lauryn Hill, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, masterpiece. Run DMC, Raising Hell, again, genre defining. Stevie Wonder, Inner Visions. Dave Brubeck, Time Out. I had that on my short list too. Curtis Mayfield, Superfly. The Star Wars, the original score. I think I put that one on once in a while, just takes me back in time. And the Isley Brothers, Go For Your Guns. But I left that off because there's some pretty rocking parts on there.
All right. So interesting that at the end of the day, there actually is a lot of overlap between people, considering that we have the entire universe of music to listen to. Maybe that just shows why we're all on the Contrarians together. Steve, you got any honorable mentions?
Yeah, a quick note. I saw Stevie Ray Vaughan in a small club in Sunderland, Mass, right before he broke big. It was an amazing show. Yes, I have a Justice League of America. It's a surf rock thing that I got as a kid. Love it. OJ's Backstabbers. Love that record. And then Public Enemy, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. Love that record as well.
Beautiful. Nick? There we go.
Good. An album that I mentioned once before in another Contrarians episode. I don't have it to show, but Sam Cooke live at the Harlem Square Club in 1963. That's the album that was sat on the shelf for over 20 years, released. Sam Cooke, a little grittier, a little more aggressive, smoking band with King Curtis. It is just incredible. And if we do this next year, probably make my top 5, only because I discovered it last year or two. She's sort of like on the fence of rock. But I'm a big Lucinda Williams fan, and any Lucinda is good Lucinda. But the Rough Trade album is great. Car Wheels on a Gravel Road and Honeybee. Speaking of collections, good. I'm glad I'm not going to be in trouble, but any Nina Simone is great. Nina Simone. This is all of her work on the Phillips recording label. 7 albums on 4 CDs. There's not a loser in the bunch. I just love her voice, and you can listen to her all day. If I'm going to pick one of them or be forced to, Pastel Blues has a bunch of hits on it, so it's great. But any Nina's great, Nina, and this is fantastic. Great booklet, etc., etc. Speaking of another collection, I know I won't be in trouble, but any Ray Charles is great. Ray Charles. This is when he did the whole Pepsi Cola thing. This is sort of like hits a sweet spot. All the hits are on here, but any Ray is great Ray, and he's sort of the master. I also want to leave you with is sort of a alt-rock country group that just never made it big as the others, but I think that their voices are incredible. You got the Louvin brothers, you've got the Everlys, and I think that the Glazer brothers, Tom Paul, etc., are just fantastic. Their harmonies are just magical. I love them. They had some hits and minor hits throughout the 60s and 70s, broke up, got back together again, etc. We just lost all of them. They've been the three of them, they're no longer with us, but just great guys, great voices. And if you want to learn something about harmony, I would suggest the Glazer brothers, or at least Tom Paul. Tom Paul Glazer had a very gritty, raspy voice, and you could see him he just wails. Just great, unique voice. So that's it. Thanks.
Fantastic. All right, Jack, polish us off. What do you got?
Wow, man. I'm so glad Nina Simone is in there and Lauryn Hill is in there. I definitely do think that Sam Cooke record is totally a rock record.
Yeah. You're right, actually.
And then jazz fusion as well, I consider rock. That's why I didn't include Miles Davis, Ag Harda. But yeah, I mean, Miles Davis too. I'm totally obsessed. For my honorable mentions, Mozart, the complete horn concertos. I love horns. They just sound, they have such a nice, like, round, smooth, warm sound to me. And especially the way that Mozart uses them. They're so delicate. I like, I think Kevin, when you were talking about Al Green, which was a great record, you said it's like he's using the instruments as paint with brushes. That's like absolutely Mozart's MO. And then the one that was the overlap was A Love Supreme, John Coltrane. This is it to me, it might be like the greatest album of all time of any genre. And this is a very special copy to me because it is signed by the philosopher Cornel West, who was a professor of mine at Union Theological Seminary. To Brother Jack Holloway, stay strong, love Supremes forever, love Cornel West. So this is one of my prize possessions. And it was originally in my top 5, but I scooted it out for the sake of diversity. But this has been really fun. I'm so glad. Like, and it's some of you, we definitely need to like talk more. Kevin, I love your Angel Witch shirt, and yeah, you all have great taste. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, we're glad that you could be here. I just have one honorable mention. Like I said, I could go on and on about my favorite jazz guitarists. But when I listen to non-guitar related jazz, I pull out Herbie Hancock's Headhunter because it's one of the most amazing jazz albums ever recorded. It's a seminal album in terms of funk and piano-led jazz. Oh, it's just, I can't say enough about it. If you've never heard it, you need to listen to it. It's only 5 songs, but they are amazing. Absolutely amazing. Made Herbie Hancock a household name. Although I first encountered him watching his videos on MTV, so I listened to a different Herbie Hancock. All right, so there we go. That is everybody's top 5 non-rock albums. A lot of different genres represented, a lot of different philosophies. You know, I would not put jazz fusion as rock. I would put pop as rock. That's all part of the fun. You get to make your own definitions. That's why I love these thought exercises, right? If you want to participate in these panels or have any say as to the topics, feel free to check out the Patreon situation. Besides, it's, as you can see, it's a great group of folks. We would love to have you. We'd love to hang out. Check out the t-shirts. You have to supply your own hair. We don't do that. And we will see you next time on the Contrarians. Thank you very much.